Hello, people. A sudden impulse takes over, and I want to post about a topic that I don't like talking about, and a topic that um, maybe is going to sound like bragging, but it is also a bit embarrassing and shameful. And this is the worst injury I ever intentionally gave a sparring partner or somebody I was sparring or fighting with. All right. And I clearly remember it, and I've avoided talking about it, but he's been passed away uh, quite a few years. And it's my fourth Dan black belt test in Goju Dao Te Karate Do, which I am now the only living active master of, and the style may die out. And in my own time, even though I'm, still consider myself primarily a Chinese and Filipino martial arts guy, Goju Dao Te Karate Do is an awesome system, and I'm in the process of refining it, looking at the forms, the techniques, the training modalities, and revamping it, revitalizing it, and designing it so if I find a student or students um, who want to learn this style from white belt to fourth degree master, that it'll be something worthwhile for them, relevant to the modern age, relevant to self defense, street combat, sport competition in all formats from point fighting to MMA. And yes, it does have an Okinawan and Chinese influence, but it is a system created by Jeff Mack, who was no longer active. And at one point, the highest ranked master was the late Ed Youngsa, who ran EY Martial Arts in Hamilton, New Jersey. Um, I was actually black belt years before him, but I went away to the Marine Corps. I came back, and he was teaching a lot of the classes, and then we both took over a lot of the teaching duties, and Jeff oversaw. Years pass, we both break off from Jeff, and I went more into the Kung Fu and Kali, and he went into Taekwondo instruction, and he actually joined the WTF under Song H. Kim. Years pass, he becomes independent again, and he got his fourth done with Jeff, and he took over the system. And I said, I want to finish my training. I have my black belt in it. I want to progress. And we used to get together and spar and train all the time for years. And when it came time for my fourth down test, I said, give me any test you want, any conditions, anything, and I will do it. I don't care if you want me to fight a bear, right? Or do kata for days or run a marathon. And he said, it's real simple. You have to fight me full contact. I said, fine. So it was in his garage, and there's supposed to be film footage of it, but I pretty much guarantee when he was alive, he erased it. Okay? So that's when I injured him. And you have to have a little bit of context. At that time, for years, he had been competing regionally, state-wise, and nationally. He had been competing all across the USA, Battle of Atlanta. I think he'd maybe made it to California. He was doing all kinds of competitions in his 20s and 30s, right? And I was in my 30s at the time, and I had been focusing on a lot of Kung Fu. I had been training with Master Xian Gao. Simultaneously, concurrently, I was training with Master Bonifacio Lim. I have a black sash under Bonifacio Lim. I'm one of the few non Chinese in this country, in that system, under him, in that lineage, that has that to show, and I have his signature on it to prove it. But I'd also trained in Shaolin Chuan Fa Silam Pai Kwan with Ishmael Sadat, and I'd also trained with the late Leon Trescott, later Leon Trescott LB. And folks, the Shaolin Chuan Fa and Leon Trescott system, Shihe Chuan, we sparred. We sparred all the time. Shaolin Chuan Fa Silam Pai Kwan, we sparred hard. But again, when I moved on to, 4-year college and grad school and a PhD program, I had the chance to train with many people, and I was constantly sparring and testing techniques, doing self-defense techniques, combat techniques, weapons, all sorts of things. Even when I was going down to Flushing, Queens, and staying there for the weekend and training at Master Gao's, who was a lot of basics and conditioning and forms and weapons, I was sparring with people. I was testing things out. So Ed, I think, thought that I would be easy pickings and he'd humiliate me, and he wanted to videotape it. And we started sparring. And, it was kind of funny because before we started, I said, "What are the rules? Can I use leg kicks?" He said, "Yeah." So I opened up with a leg kick, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Leg kick." "No, we're not doing that." Like, he instantly knew he didn't want to get leg kicked again, even though I didn't hit him hard. But I have, kind of like tree trunk legs compared to Ed, put it that way. So we began sparring, and he's a mover, a high kicker, lots of double kicks, taekwondo kicks, axe kicks. And as soon as he hit me with the first kick, I was like, of course, I'm going to move in. I started jabbing. Each jab as I come in closer. Once I closed, I would do a Ji Chun Choi from Wing Chun. And, after he got hit hard a couple times, he turtled up. And, I think he realized, wait, not only can he still spar, he's gotten better than he was when I, used to spar him all the time, right? Because I would come by here and there, we'd train, and, we would do a lot of conditioning and drills. We wouldn't do a whole hell of a lot of sparring. We would do a lot of like long workouts, going over multiple techniques, hitting the pads, working with partners, things like that. But I think he was kind of saving this moment as icing on the cake, and it was just not happening, right? And so I think his ego began to be hurt, and he cranked it up. And at that point I was like, well, I'm going to pull these shots a little less and less. And it just seemed like my fist was magnetized to his face, both of them. I mean, it seemed like whenever he put on the pressure, I could close in and start hitting him. And he was always, teasing people, well, I'm a kicker, I'll kick you from a distance. And he always had this weird thing where if you did something a little better than him on any given day, he'd claim to be something else. If you, came in and did a takedown or did a self-defense technique in practice, he's like, well, I'm more of a competition fighter. But if you, were doing a sport format with him and you kicked him in the face or, scored with a clean sport technique, he'd be like, well, I'm more of a street fighter. Like, he would constantly change this too. Like, I'm not a psychologist, but I'd be willing to say there was a little bit of narcissistic personality going on there, which I think a lot of martial artists have, and you almost have to have a higher than normal amount of it to persist in the martial arts, especially past black belt, right? So he started cranking it up, and I'm like, he's trying to hurt me. So again, I'm in southpaw. I do a triple jab, and at one point he's against the door of the garage, and I'm jabbing him, pop, 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 and then I did a continuous chain punches of Wing Chun, which hit him, and I was hitting him pretty hard. And automatically I did a front hand trap and kind of zoned a little bit to the outside, and I saw a clear opportunity for a left leg roundhouse kick, and my leg was almost up in the air before I knew what I was doing, and I realized if I hit him, with his shin like I intended, and hit him in the side of his head, like in the temple, because he was hunched up, it would have slammed his head into the garage and probably hurt him really bad. So I pulled the kick. We had the foot pads on, and I tapped him full speed but with control. Tapped him pretty much on the eyebrow, and then I pulled back and let him recover. And I honestly think that is the most humiliating thing that had ever been done to him in sparring. I'm shorter, I'm older, I don't do a lot of sport format sparring. I love doing self-defense techniques, grabs, holds, tackles, weapon attacks, both prearranged and chaotic style. But I'd maintain my sparring skills, and quite simply, I hit harder than him. And I think that kick, hitting him in the face, full power with just enough control to tap him and not even cause a bruise, angered him probably for the rest of his life. It probably would have been more merciful to knock him out or, just keep hitting him with my hands, and he could have satisfied himself with the idea that, well, he can't really kick me in the face. Ed was willing to take a beating to just keep kicking you in the face, and he could always say, well, yeah, I'm a better fighter because I can hit you in the face with my kicks, and I'm holding back even if he wasn't. So I think it was a tremendous psychological injury, and it might have been more merciful to knock him out. Now, as a bonus, I'm going to tell you about the worst injury I gave a training partner unintentionally. And, it's something that still haunts me, and it modified the way I train people and the way I do things. Because if you've ever trained with the ultra super thick chest pads that are used where, people are hitting you with police batons and stuff, I used to put that on and kind of, have my students hit it, and I'd pepper them with kicks and punches. And when I was a full-time paid instructor at Golden Eagle Karate back in the 90s, I did that quite a bit. And I had an older student who was a brown belt getting ready for black belt, but he'd already, I think, been a red belt in Tang Soo Do. Red belt is like their equivalent of brown belt. And he was a good guy. I liked him. And I was constantly telling him, get your hands up, right? And he threw a roundhouse kick to my chest, and I spun around. I had my right side forward. I did a spinning hook kick high. And my intention was to throw it short and throw it above his head. But, I miscalculated. And I hit him, I think, on his left side on the orbit bone where I'd been hit. I think I hit him right there. And he instantly fell down, and I was like, shit, I knocked him out. And there was like a mixed class of adults and kids, mostly adults. And I dropped down immediately on my knees. Are you okay? And there was blood coming out of his nose and his mouth. I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I think I killed him. And we had to call the ER, right? And he came back to class. And he had, I think, a couple of months ago, gotten a vasectomy, and he was recovering from it too. And he was just a great guy. And he came back to my classes and he said, "Was that a test?" Because I know a lot of schools, they kind of bang you up before a black belt, and I was like, "No, man, it was a mistake. I honestly, heartfelt sorry." And I'm not sure. You can't tell then as now. People aren't always completely honest about what you're doing. I'm not sure if he really said, "Yeah, that was a test," and I accept it, or if he was trying to entrap me into a what would have been a false confession and sue me. He would have gotten nothing, or sue the school. But I think Jeff gave him something. But it completely changed the way that I train people. Before that, realism and dynamism and aliveness were my number one priorities in training people. And right now, all of that is a little bit behind safety. I never want to hurt anybody again unintentionally. Now, if there's call to hurt you, I want to be able to do it, but I need to be justified in what I'm doing, because I learned some of the techniques you're doing are incredibly powerful and lethal. And people have died from a spinning hook kick if they barge into it. I've seen more people knocked out unintentionally by spinning hook kicks at competitions, especially point competitions, than any other technique from 1980 till now. All right? So, all this is to say, when I hit Ed with those punches, I intended to hit him. He was intending to hit me. He was a master level black belt. I aspired to be a master level black belt. He passed me on that test. The mental injury was something that I think didn't manifest till later, and I began to note it. It was a resentment he had. He kind of always resented people who were not white, who exhibited any degree of superiority in anything to him or another white person. But I mean, this was a whole other level. And this other gentleman, I think he got his black belt. And man, if you're there, I am sorry. I did not mean it. It was not a test. The only test it was a test of my teaching ability and my ability to gauge the level of safety in something. And I failed that test. I passed my master's test years later, because that was around 2003. In the 90s, when I was working on that drill, it revealed to me a flaw in my teaching methodology. And I've worked hard over the years, and I've never hurt a student seriously since then. Even with that, my students who have had to defend themselves or compete since then have vindicated themselves on the street and in different competition formats. So, again, anybody I've ever injured in training unintentionally, I'm sorry. Now, if you hit me hard in training and I hit you back, well, that's kind of how it goes.